Imagine you're crouched beside a fire that's almost gone out. The meat in front of you has been sitting since yesterday. It smells sour, slightly off, the kind of smell your body has learned to flinch away from. You're hungry enough to eat it anyway. There's no supermarket behind you. No label. No one to call if this goes wrong. Just you, a dying fire, and a piece of meat that might keep you alive, or might be the last thing you ever eat. Someone crouched beside you reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a handful of dried bark, ground almost to dust. They throw it into the pot without a word. The smell shifts. Sharp. Almost stinging. You eat it anyway because you trust them, or because you're too hungry to argue. And this time, your body doesn't punish you for it. That's cinnamon, or something close to it. And it's one of the small, quiet reasons you're alive today. Reading this on a screen instead of not existing at all. For you, spices are a rack next to the stove, a pinch of this, a dash of that, reached for without a second thought, purely to make dinner taste better. For your ancestors, that same handful of bark or root or seed was the difference between food that slowly poisoned you and food that kept you moving through another season. You seasoned food for pleasure. They seasoned it to survive it. Once you see that flip, you can't unsee it every time you reach for the pepper grinder. Long before cities, before writing, before anyone had a word for chemistry or medicine, humans were already ruthless observers of the natural world, not by choice but because survival demanded it. If birds returned again and again to the same berry bush without dropping dead, that bush was worth investigating. If wild pigs dug up a particular root every season without fail, that was a clue worth remembering. Trial and error did the rest, and trial and error in this era was brutal. Toxic plants were eliminated from memory the hard way, sometimes at the cost of a life. Plants that nourished, smelled good, or calmed an upset stomach were remembered, tested again, and shared. None of this was written down. It lived inside people, passed hand to hand, generation stacking on generation, until entire communities carried what was essentially an unwritten encyclopedia of every useful plant within walking distance. Some roots calmed an aching stomach. Some seeds made tough meat taste richer. Certain aromatic barks seemed to slow spoilage, buying a family an extra day. Others didn't stop the spoiling at all. They just masked the smell enough to make eating slightly off meat bearable. Without knowing it, these communities were laying the foundation of what we'd eventually call ethnobotany. None of it would have gone far without fire. At Kesem Cave in Israel, archaeologists have documented recurring, structured hearth use dating back roughly 300,000 to 400,000 years, ash layers, burned bone, and flint tools clustered around fixed fire spots. Not a single stray campfire, but a repeated habit. That's the kind of evidence that turns early humans probably used fire into something closer to a working timeline. Once cooking became routine, humans opened a door that would eventually lead to the entire spice trade. And the rack sitting in your kitchen right now. Heat does things raw plants can't do alone. Roots turn sweeter. Seeds crack open, and release oils that were locked away raw. Bark develops aromas nothing like its cold, woody smell. Picture a hunter roasting meat over a flame while nearby herbs fall in by accident. The smell stops them mid-motion. They wrap the next piece of meat in those same leaves. And it tastes even better. Multiply that accident across thousands of generations, across every forest and coastline humans ever occupied, and a spice cabinet starts to look less like an invention and more like an inevitability. This isn't just a nice story either. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham built an entire, still debated academic case around a version of this idea, that cooked food, not raw food, is what let the human brain and gut evolve the way they did, because cooking effectively pre-digests calories our bodies couldn't otherwise extract. His hypothesis is contested, and not every researcher agrees with his timeline, but the core claim that fire didn't just change what we ate, it changed us, is taken seriously enough to still be argued over decades later. Ancient grinding stones give us one of the clearest physical clues. Archaeologists have found stone tools more than 30,000 years old showing wear patterns from crushing seeds, roots, and plant material. Under the microscope, some of the starch trapped in those stones matches known staple foods. But some doesn't. Some belongs to aromatic plants with no real nutritional value at all. That detail matters. It means people were processing plants for reasons beyond pure survival more than 30,000 years ago. In 2013, archaeobotanist Hayley Saul examined pottery shards from a Neolithic coastal site in Denmark called Neustadt, radiocarbon dated to roughly 6,100 years ago. Baked into the charred residue on the clay, she found the silica skeletons of garlic mustard seeds. Garlic mustard is nutritionally close to worthless. It doesn't fill you up, doesn't store through winter. The only real reason to grind it into a fish stew is flavor. That single find pushed the earliest confirmed evidence of flavor-driven spice use back thousands of years. And it told us something simple. Your ancestors weren't only eating to survive. Even on the edge of the Baltic Sea, 6,000 years ago, they were already trying to eat well. Flavor wasn't the whole story, though. Roughly 4,500 years ago, at the site of Farmana in modern Haryana, India, researchers Arunima Kashyap and Steve Weber recovered starch grains from ancient cooking vessels and from calcified plaque on human teeth. The starch matched turmeric, ginger, and garlic. Published in 2010, the finding mattered because those three ingredients aren't just pleasant. They're natural antimicrobials, and modern lab studies have shown turmeric can suppress several strains of foodborne bacteria. People in the Indus Valley may not have been chasing flavor first. They may have been fighting an invisible enemy they had no name for, roughly 10,000 years before anyone understood what a microbe was. By 1700 BCE, at the site of Turka in modern Syria, on the banks of the Euphrates, archaeologists found a sealed ceramic vessel containing a single clove. At the time, cloves grew only on a small cluster of volcanic islands in what's now Indonesia. More than 4,000 miles from Turka by any route available then. That's roughly the distance from London to New York, with no engines, no maps beyond word of mouth, and no single trader who covered the whole route. One clove reaching Syria means dozens, maybe hundreds of hands touched it along the way. Merchants who never saw the islands it came from, sailors who never knew what it would be used for. This is the earliest hard physical evidence of a long-distance spice trade network, existing centuries before anyone had coined the phrase Silk Road. That clove represents an entire hidden economy, a supply chain running on foot, camel, and sail, moving something with 0 calories and 0 survival value on its own, purely because it made food last longer and taste less like decay. Black pepper, one of the least thought about spices in your kitchen, was once valuable enough to function as currency. In 408 AD, when the Visigoth king Alaric laid siege to Rome, part of the ransom he demanded to spare the city included 3,000 pounds of pepper. Not gold. Pepper. The Roman historian Zosimus recorded the event directly. The obvious answer, that ancient people just liked how pepper or cinnamon made bland food exciting, doesn't fully hold up. In 2001, food scientists Jennifer Billing and Paul Sherman analyzed more than 4,500 traditional recipes from 36 countries against local climate data. The pattern: hotter countries used more spices, and more of the specific spices with documented antibacterial properties in lab testing. Countries closer to the equator, where meat spoils fastest, used the widest range and heaviest quantities. It's worth being careful here. This is a correlation. And Billing and Sherman's antimicrobial explanation is one hypothesis among researchers who study this, not a settled fact. But it's a striking pattern, and it suggests flavor alone doesn't fully explain spice geography. A reasonable reading. Flavor may have been the reward your brain gave you for choosing ingredients that also happened to help keep you from getting sick. More than 30,000 years ago, grinding stones show humans processing aromatic, non-staple plants. Roughly 6,100 years ago, garlic mustard baked into Danish pottery, evidence that flavor mattered on its own. Around 4,500 years ago, turmeric, ginger, and garlic embedded in teeth in the Indus Valley, doubling as medicine. By 1700 BCE, a single clove travels 4,000 miles to reach Syria, proof of a real trade network. By 408 AD, pepper is valuable enough to help ransom an empire. By the 1400s and 1500s, naval expeditions funded by kings and queens are launched to control the spice trade, reshaping maps and continents. Now think back to that fire, that pot of meat on the edge of spoiling, that handful of bark thrown in without a word. It was never really about flavor first, it was survival, wrapped in something that happened to taste good enough to remember, repeat, and pass down for tens of thousands of years. You get irritated when a food delivery app runs 40 minutes late. Your ancestors sent ships across oceans and waited years, sometimes never returning, for a single shipment of cloves. You sigh when a recipe calls for one ingredient you don't have. Entire economies rose and fell over whether a kingdom had reliable access to pepper. You sprinkle cinnamon into your coffee on a Tuesday without a second thought. Someone, thousands of years ago, carried that exact plant for 1,000 miles on foot, hoping it would be worth more than gold by the time they arrived somewhere it could be sold. The next time you reach for the spice rack, you're not simply seasoning dinner. You're holding the end of a chain that stretches back through empires, sunken ships, forgotten trade routes, and fires that stopped burning tens of thousands of years ago. all the way back to a handful of bark thrown into a pot by someone who, more than anything else, just wanted to survive the night.